Hello and welcome to second semester. Sorry I'm not there today. My son has a fever, so I had to stay home with him. Hopefully, I will be back tomorrow. But hey, we're going to kick off second semester doing some percents without a calculator. So the goal of today is to just kind of use what we know or what we learned today to find different percents. So if you're looking at these first two things here, the number line and then these percent fraction equivalents, a lot of these are percents that you should probably already know. Okay, so obviously we know 1/2 equals 50%, or 1/4 equals 25%. If you're looking around here at the chart and the number line, there's probably others you already knew. Maybe some you didn't know. But by the end of this unit, hopefully you'll know all these, even stuff like 5/6. So we want to take what we know to find new percents. So let's say we're talking about 2/5 is 40%. What if I want to know what 1/5 is? Well, if 2/5 is 40% and I want to know 1/5, I just have to cut that 40% in half. 1/5 is 20%. Or if I want to know 3/5, I'm just going to add 20%. 3/5 is 60%. 4/5 is 80%. Okay? Stuff like that. Let's say we want to know 5/8. I know you already see it listed here. Let's say you didn't know 5/8 was 62.5%. Well, we know 4/8 is 50%. Okay? Maybe we know 1/8 is 12.5%. But if we didn't, look at 1/4 is 25%, 2/8 is 25%. If I wanted to know 1/8, I'd cut it in half. Okay? Half of 2/8 is 12.5%. Okay? So I would take 50% plus 1/8, 12.5%, to get 5/8 at 62.5%. I'm sure I explained that very well. Okay? I know you're right on board with that. Okay? Same could be said about 1/3. Okay? Most of you know that 1/3 is 33%. Well, 1/3 is the same as 2/6. If we didn't know what 1/6 was, we would just cut this 33 1/3% in half to figure out 1/6. Okay? So stuff like that. It's actually going to be a little simpler when we get onto the stuff for today, but that's the kind of stuff we want to think about. All right, so if we're looking at example 1, now there's lots of ways you could find these percentages. I'm just going to show you one way, and if you don't want to do that way, if you've got other ways to solve it in your head, go for it. Okay, we're going to be learning other ways once we're using our calculator later on in this unit. Okay, but the way I'm going to think about this is I know that 75% is 3/4. So I'm actually trying to find 3/4 of 24. Okay, so one way I could do that is to know that, well, 24 divided by 4 equals 6. So that means 1/4 of 24 is 6. So I'm just going to take this 6 times 3 to get 18. Okay, 18 out of 24 would equal 75%. Okay, I can do the same thing here. I happen to know that 80% is 8/10 or 4/5. So I'm trying to find 4/5 of 60. I can take 60 divided by 5 to get 12. Okay, so 60 is broken up into 12 groups of 5, and I just need 4 of them because I'm just wanting 80% of 60. So 80% of 60 is 48. All right, you go ahead and try. We'll pause the video, give those two a try. You can work with a partner if you want. Okay, so if you want to go around and kind of share your way of solving these, that's a good idea right now. It's good to hear how other people are thinking about this. If not, I'm just going to show you that 40% is the same as 2/5. So I want 2/5 of 50. Okay, 50 divided by 5 is 10. And 10 times 2 is 20. All right. We could also think of that as we're trying to find this missing number, right? We know that 5 times 10 equals 50, so 2 times 10 equals 20. And that's also setting up a proportion, which we will do later on in this unit. Okay, so 40% of 50 is 20. All right, 30% of 70. Most of us should know that 30% is the same as 3/10. 3/10 of 70 is what we're looking for. 70 divided by 10 is 7. So I'm looking for 3 groups of 7. 3 times 7 is 21. So 30% of 70 is 21. Okay. So 10% and 1%. How we're going to do 10% and 1% is just by moving our decimal. So we've got an imaginary decimal right there behind our 6 and the number 76. And if I want to know 10% of 76, all I have to do, and I can do it in my head, is just move that decimal. 10% of 76 is 7.6. So that's a very handy thing. We can figure out a lot of percents just by knowing how to do 10% and 1%. So 1% will be very similar. We'll put our decimal point, but instead of moving 1 spot, we're going to move 2 spots. I'm going to move that decimal 2 spots to get 1%. 1% of 122 is 1.22. Okay, I could times that by 100 to get 122. So 1% of 122 right there. All right, you go ahead and try. I'm sure it won't take you very long. We could pause the video if you want. Okay, we're just going to move our decimal. Put our decimal in, move it over. 10% of 42 is 4.2. 1% of 64. Put your decimal in, move it twice for 1%. 2.64. Okay. Example 3. Hannah has a coupon for 20% off her entire clothing purchase. If the items she buys cost $110 originally, how much will she save with her coupon? So to find 20%, we can take what we know about finding 10%. I know that 10% of 110 is 11. So if 10% is 11, I just need to add another 10% to get 20%. That's 10%. This is 10%. Add them together, we get 20%. So she's going to save $22. All right, and pause the video. You can go ahead and try the next one. This one's a little bit different. See who can figure it out. Okay, so 15%. We haven't talked about how to find 15% yet, but we're going to use what we know about 10% and what I was talking about at the very beginning of the lesson. So we put our decimal spot, we move it. We can see that 10% of 800 is 80. Okay, so I've got 10%, but I need another 5% to make 15%, right? 10% plus 5%. So I just need to know what 5% of 80 is. So I can cut 10% in half. 5% of 80 is 40. If I add those together, because this was my 10%, 40 is my 5%, add those together, we get a total of $120 for the discount. All right, estimating percents. Mr. Williams ordered 4 pizzas for a birthday party. The cost of the pizzas was $57.96. He wants to tip the delivery person about 15%. What is a reasonable amount for the tip? All right, so it says to estimate, and you're probably guessing that we're going to round this to 58. Well, I'm going to actually make this real easy for us, and I'm going to round this to 60. Because I honestly do this. If I'm trying to figure out a tip or tax on something, I don't have a calculator with me, I'm probably not rounding that to $58. I'm just going to round it to 60, make it easy for myself. Okay, because I very easily know that 10% of 60 is 6. And then I need another 5%, so I'm going to cut 6 in half, and that's 3. So my 10% plus my 5% will give me 15%. A reasonable tip would be $9. Now, I also know I rounded up, right? So, $9, $8.50, whatever. I'm probably going to be a nice tipper and just round up and tip $9. All right, you go ahead and do the same thing. Pause the video and try this one. Okay, so again, $48.61. Their bill was $48.61. They want to leave their server a 15% tip. What would be a reasonable amount for the tip? Okay, so again, we don't need to round this to 49. We can just say this is about a $50 meal. We're going to find 10% of 50, which is 5. We're then going to find 5% of that, because we want 10% plus 5%. So 5%, cut 5 in half, we get 2.5. Add those together, and a reasonable tip would be $7.50. Okay, thanks for sticking with these video recorded notes on the first day back. You're now going to go on Class Kick. We're going to be on Chapter 6, Percents now. And you're just going to work on slides 1 and 2. This shouldn't be too challenging, so I'd like you all to try and do your own work on this. You can talk to your partners if you're still working, but try and do your own work.